For 10 years, my life was perfect, or at least it felt that way. I had a husband, Adam, who was my best friend and my rock. We had a home filled with love, a steady rhythm of trust, and a promise to always be honest and faithful to each other. But even the strongest vows can shatter when desire sneaks in. It all started on a Monday, the most mundane of days, when Ryan walked into my office. He was 19, hired as an office assistant to fetch coffee and organize files. I barely noticed him at first, just another young face trying to make his way in the world. But then he smiled at me. That smile, it was disarming, confident, and far too knowing for someone his age. Ryan wasn't just attractive. He was magnetic, the kind of person who drew people in without trying. He had muscles that stretched against his tight shirts, dark eyes that seemed to see right through me, and a swagger that left little to the imagination. I was 32, a grown man with a stable marriage and a career in law. I should have been immune to someone like him, but I wasn't. This is the story of how one young man brought my world crashing down. How I let a fleeting moment of passion destroy a decade of love. How I lost everything that mattered to me. All because of a boy I should have stayed far away from. The first time I noticed Ryan, really noticed him, he was standing in my office doorway holding a tray of coffees. It was a typical gray Monday morning, and I was already buried in legal briefs and deadlines. "Your coffee, Mr. Walker," he said, stepping inside with a casual confidence that immediately caught my attention. I looked up briefly, distracted, and took the cup from him without much thought. "Thanks, Ryan," I mumbled, returning to my work. But then he lingered. "Busy morning?" he asked, leaning slightly against the doorframe. I glanced up again, this time actually looking at him. His shirt hugged his chest in a way that made it clear he spent more time at the gym than most 19-year-olds. And his dark, messy hair framed a face that seemed almost too perfect. "Always," I replied curtly, forcing myself to focus on my work. Ryan smirked. "Well, let me know if you need anything else," he said, his tone just playful enough to make my stomach tighten. He turned and left, and I told myself it was nothing. Just a kid being overly friendly. But the moment stuck with me, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. That night, as I sat across from Adam at the dinner table, I felt a pang of guilt. He was smiling at me, telling me about his day, and I was nodding along, pretending to listen. But in the back of my mind, all I could see was Ryan's smirk. "Everything okay?" Adam asked, his voice filled with concern. "Yeah," I replied quickly, forcing a smile. "Just tired from work." He nodded, accepting the answer, but I felt the weight of my lie settle in my chest. Ryan had a way of making himself known. Over the next few weeks, he seemed to be everywhere, bringing me coffee in the mornings, organizing files in the corner of my office, and always finding an excuse to talk to me. "Mr. Walker," he said one afternoon, leaning over my desk with that same infuriating smirk. "You work too hard. Don't you ever take a break?" I glanced up, trying to keep my expression neutral. "Work doesn't get done by itself," I replied, my tone sharper than I intended. "Fair enough," he said, shrugging, but he didn't move. Instead, he sat on the edge of my desk, his arms crossed casually, his presence impossible to ignore. "Do you need something, Ryan?" I asked, annoyed by how easily he got under my skin. "Not really," he said, his eyes locking with mine. "Just thought you could use some company." I should have told him to leave. I should have reminded him that this was a professional environment and that his behavior was inappropriate. But instead, I sat there, frozen, as the air between us grew thick with tension. "Ryan," I said finally, my voice quieter now, "you should get back to work." He smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "Whatever you say, Mr. Walker." That night, as I lay in bed beside Adam, I couldn't stop thinking about Ryan. The way he looked at me, the way his voice dipped when he spoke my name. It was wrong, I knew that, but it didn't stop the thoughts from creeping in. The office was nearly empty one evening when Ryan appeared at my door again. I was staying late to finish a case, and the only sounds were the faint hum of the air conditioning and the tapping of my keyboard. "You're still here?" he asked, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I could ask you the same thing," I replied, glancing up. "I'm reorganizing the break room," he said with a shrug. "Figured I'd see if you needed anything before I head out." I shook my head, returning to my work. "I'm fine, thanks." But Ryan didn't leave. Instead, he walked over to my desk and leaned down, his face close enough that I could smell his cologne. "You work too hard," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Ryan, this isn't appropriate," I said, my voice shaking. "Isn't it?" he asked, his lips curling into a smirk. Before I could respond, his hand brushed mine. Just a fleeting touch, but it felt like a spark of electricity. I pulled back quickly, my breath catching in my throat. "You should go," I said firmly, trying to regain control. Ryan hesitated, his eyes searching mine, and for a moment, I thought he might say something. But then he nodded and walked away, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts. The line was crossed on a rainy Thursday evening. The office was unusually quiet, and the sound of raindrops hitting the windows filled the space. I had stayed late, buried in contracts and deadlines when Ryan appeared at my door. "You're always the last one here," he said, stepping inside without hesitation. "I have a lot to get done," I replied, my voice flat, hoping to discourage him. But Ryan wasn't easily deterred. He closed the door behind him and walked over to the couch in the corner of my office, sitting down like he belonged there. "You don't have to work yourself to death, Mr. Walker," he said, his tone teasing. "What's the point of all this if you never enjoy life?" I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "Ryan, it's late. You should go home." He tilted his head, his eyes fixed on mine. "I think you need someone to help you relax." Before I could respond, he stood up and walked over to me, his steps slow and deliberate. He leaned down, placing his hands on the edge of my desk, and for a moment, we were face to face. "Ryan," I started, my voice shaking. "This is..." But then he kissed me. It wasn't gentle or hesitant. It was bold, hungry, and it shattered every ounce of resistance I had left. I should have pushed him away, should have told him to stop. But instead, I found myself pulling him closer, my hands tangling in his hair as I gave in to the desire I had been fighting for weeks. When we finally pulled apart, his lips curled into a triumphant smile. "I knew you felt it too," he said softly. I couldn't speak. The weight of what I had just done hit me like a freight train. "This can't happen again," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Ryan shrugged, his confidence unshaken. "Whatever you say, Mr. Walker." But deep down, I knew the truth. It would happen again. The first time was reckless, but the second time was intentional. The third, planned. By the fourth, it had become a routine. Our routine. Ryan and I no longer hid behind chance encounters. We orchestrated them. Late nights at the office became our haven. I started finding excuses to stay after hours, sending Adam texts that grew increasingly mechanical. Busy night. Don't wait up. The guilt of those words lingered for seconds. Only seconds, before Ryan would walk into my office and everything else disappeared. Ryan had this way of making me feel invincible and reckless all at once. He'd smirk as he leaned over my desk, his fingers brushing mine, or whisper something suggestive when no one else was around. It wasn't just the physical connection that drew me in. It was the way he made me feel seen, desired, young. "I can't stop thinking about you," he confessed one evening as we lay tangled on the couch in my office, his shirt discarded on the floor. His chest rose and fell with each breath, his eyes locked on mine. "You shouldn't," I replied, running a hand through my hair, my voice heavy with regret. "This isn't right." He propped himself up on one elbow, his expression turning serious for the first time since we'd started this dangerous game. "Then why don't you stop?" I had no answer, because the truth, the shameful, gut-wrenching truth, was that I didn't want to stop. Ryan had awakened something in me that I hadn't even realized was dormant. But the weight of my actions pressed harder every time I went home to Adam. He'd greet me with that same warm smile, the one that had always made me feel safe. Now it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. "You've been working late a lot," Adam said one night as we lay in bed, his voice soft but probing. "There's a big case coming up," I replied, staring at the ceiling. He turned to face me, his hand resting on my chest. "You know you can talk to me, right? About anything?" I nodded, swallowing it hard. "Of course, I know." But I didn't talk to him. I couldn't. Because how do you tell the man you love that you're betraying him with someone half his age? The lies had become second nature, yet they weighed heavier with each passing day. My life was now divided into two parallel worlds. One where I was the devoted husband Adam believed I still was, and another where I was consumed by Ryan. A world fueled by stolen moments and dangerous secrets. At home, Adam was becoming more perceptive. His questions were subtle but sharp, and his eyes lingered on me longer, searching for something I wasn't ready to admit. "You've been so quiet lately," he said one evening as we sat on the couch. His hand rested lightly on my knee, but his touch no longer brought me the comfort it once had. "Work's been stressful," I replied, my voice tight. Well, it was my default excuse, the shield I hid behind whenever the tension became unbearable. Adam frowned, tilting his head slightly. "You've said that a lot lately. Are you sure that's all it is?" "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "What else would it be?" His lips pressed into a thin line, and he nodded, though the doubt in his eyes was unmistakable. At the office, Ryan's boldness was escalating. He no longer waited for empty hallways or late nights. He found excuses to touch me, to flirt openly, knowing that I was powerless to resist him. "You're addicted," he said one afternoon as he leaned against my desk, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "I'm not," I snapped, though the words felt hollow even as I said them. "Then why do you keep coming back?" he asked, his smirk infuriatingly confident. I didn't have an answer, because the truth was, he was right. Ryan had become an addiction, a dangerous thrill I couldn't let go of no matter how much it was tearing me apart. It was a Friday afternoon when everything began to unravel. Adam had taken a day off, deciding to surprise me at work with lunch. I didn't know he was there until my phone buzzed with a message. I'm downstairs in the lobby. Panic surged through me. Ryan was in my office, sprawled casually on the couch, tossing a stress ball in the air like he owned the place. His shirt was slightly unbuttoned, revealing the toned chest I had spent too many nights thinking about. "You need to leave now," I said, my voice sharp as I grabbed his jacket from the chair and threw it at him. Ryan caught it, his smirk faltering slightly. "Relax, Nate. What's the rush?" "Adam's here," I hissed, my heart pounding in my chest. Ryan raised an eyebrow, his lips curling back into that infuriating grin. "Trouble in paradise?" "Get out!" I snapped, shoving him toward the door. He chuckled as he walked out, pausing to adjust his jacket. "Don't worry, Mr. Walker. Your little secret is safe with me." By the time I reached the lobby, my hands were shaking, and I felt like I'd just run a marathon. Adam was waiting by the reception desk, holding a bag of takeout. His face lit up when he saw me, but his smile faltered slightly as he studied me. "Hey," he said, handing me the bag. "You okay? You look tense." "Yeah," I replied too quickly, forcing a smile. "Just a lot going on today." Adam tilted his head, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You sure? You seem off." "I'm fine," I said, my voice a little too loud. "Really. Thank you for bringing lunch." He nodded, though I could see the doubt lingering in his eyes. As I watched him walk away, guilt twisted in my chest like a knife. I hated myself for lying to him, for betraying the man who had always loved me unconditionally, but I couldn't stop. That night, Adam was quieter than usual. He sat across from me at the dinner table, pushing his food around on his plate, his brow furrowed. "What's wrong?" I asked, my stomach churning. He looked up at me, his expression unreadable. "I don't know. You tell me." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, I looked down at my plate, unable to meet his gaze. The tension at home was unbearable. Adam's questions came more frequently now, and his tone carried a quiet sharpness that cut deeper than any accusation. Every glance felt like a test, every moment together heavy with unspoken words. I told myself that I could keep things under control, that Adam didn't know, couldn't know. But deep down, I knew the cracks in my lies were widening. "You've been working late a lot," Adam said one evening as we sat on the couch, the TV playing in the background. He wasn't looking at me. His eyes were fixed on the screen, but his voice was deliberate. "Is everything okay at work?" "Yeah, just a heavy workload," I replied, trying to sound casual. He nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. "You've been saying that for weeks now." I hesitated, the air between us growing colder. "It's true. We've got this huge case coming up, and it's been a lot." Adam finally turned to look at me, his eyes searching mine. "You're sure that's all it is?" The weight of his gaze was almost unbearable. I forced a smile, trying to diffuse the moment. "Of course. What else would it be?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned back to the TV, his expression unreadable. But his silence was louder than any accusation. At the office, things with Ryan were spiraling out of control. He no longer cared about discretion. He'd linger by my desk, leaning too close, his voice dropping to a teasing whisper whenever he spoke. "You're on edge today," he said one afternoon, smirking as he perched on the edge of my desk. "Trouble at home?" "Ryan? Not now," I snapped, keeping my eyes on my computer screen. He chuckled, unfazed by my irritation. "Relax, Mr. Walker, I'm just trying to help." I looked up at him, my patience fraying. "You're not helping. You're making this harder." Ryan tilted his head, his smirk fading slightly. You mean your husband? My chest tightened, and I glared at him. Don't bring him into this. He shrugged, leaning back slightly. You're the one living a double life, not me. His words stung because they were true. I was trapped between two worlds, trying to keep them separate while the walls between them crumbled. Adam's suspicion grew more pointed as the days passed. He started asking questions at random moments, his tone calm but edged with doubt. What's your schedule like tomorrow? He asked one morning over breakfast. Pretty normal, I replied, not looking up from my plate. You've been putting in a lot of overtime, he said, his eyes studying me. Do you need me to bring you dinner at the office? My stomach churned. No, that's not necessary, I said quickly. I'll probably leave on time tomorrow. He said, his tone non-committal. Later that evening, as I was getting ready for bed, Adam appeared in the doorway, his arms crossed. Can I ask you something? He said, his voice soft. Of course, I replied, though my heart began to race. He hesitated, his brow furrowed. Have you been happy lately? The question caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. What do you mean? I mean, you've been distant, he said, stepping into the room. You barely talk to me anymore. You're always at work, and when you're home, it feels like you're somewhere else. I swallowed hard, the guilt pressing down on me like a weight. It's just the stress from work, I said, forcing a smile. It's not you, Adam. He nodded, but his expression didn't soften. I miss you, he said quietly. I feel like I'm losing you, and I don't know why. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to tell him the truth, to confess everything and beg for his forgiveness. But the fear of losing him completely kept me silent. I'm still here, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. At work, Ryan pushed me further. He seemed to enjoy testing my limits, finding new ways to assert his control over the situation. You're going to get caught, he said one afternoon, leaning against the wall of the break room as I poured myself a cup of coffee. Shut up, Ryan, I snapped, glancing around to make sure no one was nearby. He smirked, unbothered by my irritation. I'm just saying maybe it's time to come clean. Tell your husband the truth. Don't you dare, I hissed, my voice low but firm. Ryan raised his hands in mock surrender. Relax, Mr. Walker. I'm not the one who has to live with the guilt. I glared at him, my frustration boiling over. This isn't a game, Ryan. My marriage is on the line. And whose fault is that? He replied, his smirk fading as his tone turned serious. For the first time, his words cut through me. I couldn't blame him for this. I had made the choice to betray Adam, and now so I was paying the price. That night, Adam confronted me again. You've been distracted all evening, he said as we sat on the couch. Is something wrong? No, I replied quickly, my voice tight. You're lying, he said softly, his eyes meeting mine. I can see it in your face. I'm not lying, I insisted, though my voice faltered. Adam sighed, leaning back against the couch. I don't know what's going on, Nate, but I'm not stupid. Something's changed, and I can't pretend I don't see it. His words hung in the air, heavy and final. For the first time, I felt the ground beneath me begin to crumble, and I realized that the walls I had built to separate my two lives were about to collapse. The storm hit on a Thursday night. Adam had been quiet all evening, his movements deliberate and his gaze lingering on me longer than usual. I felt the tension radiating from him, but I convinced myself it was just another of his subtle questions, his way of trying to pull me closer. I was wrong. After dinner, Adam placed his fork down with precision and looked across the table at me, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," he said, his voice calm but edged with something I couldn't place. "Okay," I replied cautiously, setting my glass of water down. He took a deep breath, his fingers drumming against the table. "Are you having an affair?" The words hit me like a freight train. For a moment, all I could do was stare at him, my mind scrambling for a response. My chest tightened and my heart pounded in my ears as the silence stretched between us. "Adam, I..." My voice faltered, and I looked down at my hands, unable to meet his eyes. "That's a yes," he said, his voice cracking. "No, it's not..." I started, but he held up a hand to stop me. "Don't lie to me, Nate," he said, his tone sharper now. "I've known for weeks. The late nights, the distance, the excuses. I didn't want to believe it, but I'm not stupid." The weight of his words crushed me. My lies, my betrayal, it was all laid bare, and there was no escaping it. "How long?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Adam, please let me explain." "How long?" he demanded, his eyes flashing with anger. I swallowed hard, the guilt clawing at my throat. 6 months. Adam leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair as he let out a bitter laugh. 6 months, he repeated, his voice dripping with disbelief. "You've been lying to me for half a year." "I'm so sorry," I said, my voice breaking. "I didn't mean for this to happen." He slammed his hand on the table, making me flinch. "You didn't mean for it to happen? Then why didn't you stop? Why didn't you tell me?" "I was scared," I admitted, tears streaming down my face. "I didn't want to lose you." "Well, congratulations," he said coldly, standing up from the table. "You've lost me anyway." I watched helplessly as he grabbed his keys and walked toward the door. "Adam, please," I begged, following him. "Don't do this. Let me fix this." He stopped, his hand on the doorknob, and turned to face me. "You can't fix this, Nate. You broke us." And then he was gone, leaving me standing in the empty hallway, my world shattered. The house felt like a graveyard without Adam. His absence haunted every corner, his laugh, his warmth, his presence, all replaced by silence. I called him over and over, leaving messages he never returned. My texts went unread. His rejection was total, and it left a void that nothing could fill. At work, Ryan didn't bother hiding his indifference. "You look like hell," he said one morning. "You don't get to talk to me about this," I snapped. He shrugged, smirking as he walked away. I hated him, but I hated myself more. Ryan left the firm a few weeks later. He didn't tell me. I only found out when his replacement brought me coffee one morning. Part of me was relieved, but another part felt abandoned. He had been my accomplice, my partner in this destruction, and now he was gone too. Without Adam or Ryan, the weight of my choices felt unbearable. I was utterly alone. Months later, I heard through a mutual friend that Adam had moved to another city. He was rebuilding his life, starting over. I wrote him one final letter, pouring out my regret and love, but I never mailed it. What could I possibly say that would change anything? Some betrayals can't be undone. And so, I lived with the emptiness, a life defined by the echo of what I had lost. Betrayal is a storm that leaves no survivors. And this story is a vivid reminder of how one moment of weakness can unravel a lifetime of trust. Nate's journey is not just about the destruction of his marriage, but also about the consequences of losing himself in his desires. Adam, the embodiment of unconditional love, deserved better. And Ryan, he was the spark, but Nate lit the fire. This story isn't just about love, passion, or mistakes. It's about the fragility of relationships and the weight of choices we make. In the end, Nate's actions left him alone, a prisoner of his regrets. Message to the viewer. Hey, did you like this story? What score would you give it from 1 to 10? Let us know in the comments. Also, do you have a story you'd like to share? Maybe something personal or an idea that's been stuck in your mind? Drop it in the comments, and who knows? We might turn it into our next video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who loves thought-provoking stories like this one. Let's keep the conversation going.